Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the book of Psalms. Today we're in Psalm 125. This is yet another of the songs of ascent, but here we have a short one that talks about who we put our trust in and what the response from God is going to be based upon where we place that trust. It's only 5 verses in length. It's not very long, and yet there's a fair amount to unpack from this particular psalm. So let's look at what the writer says in Psalm 125. Beginning in verse 1, we read, "Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, lest the righteous reach out their hands to iniquity. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts. For as for such as turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord shall lead them away with the workers of iniquity. Peace be upon Israel." As you look at this psalm, it all is about trust and where our trust is placed and where God in response is going to be. I want to look at a couple of different aspects, one at the start of the psalm, one at the conclusion of the psalm, that help to illustrate a little bit of those statements. We're not going to go in detail in every aspect that the psalmist mentions, but let's look at a couple. The first one, found in verse 1, is he says, "Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. Those who trust in the Lord cannot be moved." In other words, when our trust is fully and completely placed in God the way that it's supposed to be, there's nothing that's going to move us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul talks about the importance at the end of that chapter of being steadfast and unmovable and always abounding in the work of the Lord. If our trust is where it's supposed to be, then nothing is going to move us away from God. Nothing is going to keep us from being what God wants us to be and from being where God wants us to be. But instead, we are going to remain where we should be forever. If we are moved away, if we are ones who move away from God or who cease to be seeking God as we should, it's generally because it's a problem with our trust in God. And we instead choose to place our trust in ourselves or in someone or something else. But the psalmist here talks about the fact that those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. They're not going to be moved. Now, by extension, in verse 2, he talks about the fact that as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever. So, if we are going to be as Mount Zion, if we're going to stay where we're supposed to be, guess what? God is too. He's not going anywhere. And things are not going to change. And the relationship that man has with God won't change either. It will be a steadfast, continuous relationship of trust and reliance and help. And then you come down to the end of the psalm. And in the end of the psalm, in verse 5, he says, "As for such as turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord shall lead them away with the workers of iniquity." For those who leave their trust in God behind. Because verse 4 talks about, "Do good, O Lord, to those who are good and to those who are upright in their hearts." But for the individual that refuses to continue along that path, who turns aside to their own ways or to their crooked ways, guess what's going to happen? They are not going to remain in the steadfast help and guidance of God. But rather, the psalmist says they're going to be turned out, they're going to be led away with the workers of iniquity. It's a very important point for us to remember is the fact that just because we start down the right path doesn't mean that's where we're going to end up if we are not fully invested in the path we're on. If we're not fully invested in putting our trust in God and in making sure that we follow and serve Him no matter what, it's very easy to leave the path to follow our own crooked ways. And when we do, we will wind up being led away with those that were never on the path to start with. Because once we leave the path of work with God, of walking with God, of putting our trust in God, and of allowing Him to guide and watch over and help us, there's nothing left other than what this world has to offer. These are some of the things that I see in Psalm 125, and there's a lot more that we could talk about and a lot more that we could place our focus on in examining this psalm, but I hope that these things have been beneficial to you. Thank you for viewing the video today. Next time we're going to come back and we're going to look at Psalm 126. I hope that you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.